The morning I was supposed to be the proudest person in that room, my mother pulled me aside and handed me a folder. She was smiling. That smile should have been a warning. Inside that folder was a transfer document. She wanted me to sign my 3 tech patents over to my younger sister before the graduation ceremony even started. She said it was a gift. She said it was the right thing to do. She said our family needed to move forward together. I stood there in my graduation gown, holding everything I had sacrificed 4 years of my life to build, and I watched my mother explain to me why it should belong to someone else. I did not cry. I did not yell. I looked at her very carefully, and I thought about the storage unit across town, and I smiled back. Before this story goes any further, I want to ask you something honest. If the people who were supposed to cheer the loudest for you spent years cheering for someone else instead, how long would you stay quiet? How long would you keep building, keep working, keep funding their lives before you finally stopped pretending it was fine? Stay with Lousia today, because this story is going to ask you that question over and over again, and by the end, the answer is going to feel very clear. My name is Lousia, and I want to tell you about the morning my family tried to take the last thing I had built entirely by myself. But to understand that morning, you need to understand the years that came before it, because nothing that happened at that graduation ceremony was sudden. It was the final moment of something that had been building for a very long time. It was the moment when everything my family believed about me, about my sister, and about what I owed them finally came into one room and had to be answered. I grew up in a house where love was not divided equally, and everyone in the house knew it. My parents never said it out loud. They never sat us down and explained that my sister Camille was the favorite. They did not have to say it. It lived in 1,000 small moments. The way my mother turned her whole body toward Camille when she walked into a room. The way my father's voice softened 2 full registers when he talked about her future. The way my accomplishments were noted and Camille's were celebrated. I learned early that there was a difference between those 2 things. Being noted meant a nod and a quick congratulations before the conversation moved on. Being celebrated meant a dinner party, a new piece of clothing, a phone call to every relative who was still alive. I was noted. Camille was celebrated. I was the older sister by 4 years, and from the time I was about 9 years old, I understood that my role in that house was to be useful. Not beloved. Useful. I was the one who helped with homework. I was the one who stayed quiet when company came. I was the one who did not complain when my bedroom was repainted to match Camille's new color preference because she said our rooms should coordinate. My room turned lilac. I liked blue. Nobody asked. I am not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me. I am telling you this because the way a child learns to exist in a family shapes the choices she makes later. And my choices, for a very long time, looked like this. Work harder, ask for less, and hope that eventually the sheer weight of everything I did would be impossible to ignore. It was not a bad strategy. It just did not work the way I hoped. I was good at school in a way that felt almost inconvenient to my parents. Not inconvenient because they did not appreciate education, but inconvenient because my kind of good did not photograph well. Camille was good at performing. She sang. She danced in a regional competition and placed 3rd, and my parents framed the ribbon. I was good at math and systems and understanding how things connected to other things. I won a regional science fair when I was 15 with a project about data compression, and my parents congratulated me and then asked if I had remembered to wish Camille good luck at her recital that same weekend. I had. I always did. By the time I was 17, I had already started teaching myself software development from library books and online courses I paid for with babysitting money. I had a plan. I was going to study computer science. I was going to build things. I did not know exactly what things yet, but I knew the feeling of solving a hard problem, that quiet internal click when something stopped being broken and became working, and I wanted to spend my life chasing that feeling. I got into a university 3 states away on a partial scholarship. The scholarship covered tuition. Living costs, books, equipment, and fees were going to require money my family did not easily have. My father sat me down and told me they were proud of me. He also told me that money was tight. They had just helped Camille enroll in a local performing arts program, and between that tuition and the costs of their own. They were not going to be able to contribute much to my university expenses. He said he knew I understood. He said he knew I was the responsible one. He was right. I did understand. I understood exactly what was happening. But I said okay, and I meant it because I had already started planning. I had saved almost $3,000 from babysitting, tutoring, and one summer of working at a hardware store. I applied for every additional scholarship and grant I could find. I deferred one semester to work full-time and save more. And then I went. Those first 2 years were the hardest physical years of my life. I worked part-time in the university's IT lab. I took on freelance coding projects for small businesses in the city through a platform that connected students to local clients. I ate the kind of meals that are embarrassing to describe. I slept less than I should have. But I was there. I was building. And in the middle of all that survival, something unexpected happened. I had an idea. It started as a class project in my second year. The assignment was to design a more efficient method for compressing and sorting large data sets for mobile applications. Most students designed something functional. I designed something that worked in a way our professor had not seen before. He pulled me aside after class and asked me to walk him through my logic. I did. He was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "Lousia, have you considered filing this?" I did not know what he meant at first. He explained patent law to me in plain terms over the next 2 weeks. He connected me with the university's intellectual property office. I spent the next 8 months refining my design, documenting every step, and working with a patent attorney the university subsidized for student inventors. And at the end of my second year, I filed my first patent application. It was a data sorting and compression method for low-bandwidth mobile environments. The kind of solution that mattered enormously in regions where internet access was unreliable, but mobile devices were still common. My professor said it was genuinely useful. The attorney said it was genuinely original. I said it was the most important thing I had ever done, and I meant that in a way I had never meant anything before. I told my parents. My mother said that sounded complicated. My father asked if it would make money soon. I said it might eventually, but that right now it was just mine. They said that was nice. Camille had just been accepted to a better performing arts program, and they were planning a small party. Did I want to come home for it? I said I would try. I did not go. I spent that weekend working on my second idea. By the end of my third year, I had 2 patent applications filed. The first had been granted. The second was in review. The first patent had already attracted quiet interest from 2 small tech companies that were building mobile platforms for developing markets. I had not sold anything yet. I was not ready. But I had been approached, and being approached meant the idea had real-world value. That knowledge settled into me like a stone dropped into deep water. Heavy. Permanent. I also had something else by that point. I had debt. Not catastrophic debt, but real debt. I had taken out 2 small personal loans during a particularly difficult stretch in my second year, when a freelance client had not paid me for 3 months of work, and I had to choose between rent and eating properly. I paid back one of the loans in full by the end of my third year. The second one I was still managing carefully. I did not tell my parents about the debt. I had learned by then that telling my parents about my struggles produced one of 2 responses. Either they told me they were sorry, but there was nothing they could do, or they turned it into evidence that I needed to come home and live more practically. Neither response helped, so I handled it myself. What I did tell them, near the end of my third year, was that I had something real developing professionally. I told my father I had 2 patents, one granted and one pending, and that I was being approached by companies who wanted to license or buy the technology. I told him I believed it was going to amount to something significant within the next 2 to 3 years. My father was quiet. Then he said something I have thought about many times since. He said, "Lousia, that sounds like something the whole family could benefit from." I did not understand what he meant. I thought he meant he was proud. I thought he meant he was happy for us as a family, that his daughter had made something real. I said yes. I hoped it would give me a good foundation. He said exactly, a foundation for everyone. I still did not hear the full meaning of what he was saying. I was 22 years old and still in the habit of giving my father the most generous possible interpretation of everything he said. It took me another year to understand that he had not been expressing pride. He had been laying groundwork. My third year ended, and my fourth year began. In that final year, three things happened almost simultaneously that changed everything. First, my second patent was granted. It was a related but distinct method, a refinement of the first that addressed a specific problem in real-time data synchronization across unstable networks. It was, according to the attorney who had now become something of an informal advisor to me, potentially more commercially valuable than the first. Together, the two patents formed a small but coherent intellectual property portfolio. Second, I developed a third invention. This one was different in character. It was a software-based organizational tool for small medical clinics in low-resource environments, a way to manage patient records and appointment scheduling without requiring continuous internet access or expensive hardware. I had been inspired by a conversation with a classmate whose family ran a rural clinic in another country. She described the chaos of paper records and the cost of digital systems her clinic could not afford. I spent 4 months building a solution. I filed the third patent application in the spring of my final year. Third, my sister Camille's performing arts career hit a wall. I say that plainly because that is what happened. Camille had spent 3 years pursuing performance seriously. She had talent. That was real. But the industry she was trying to enter was extremely competitive and expensive, and by the time she was 20 years old, it was becoming clear to everyone, including Camille, that the path she had imagined was not opening the way she had hoped. She had spent money on programs, coaches, auditions, and travel. My parents had spent money supporting her. The return was not coming. My parents were not angry at Camille. They were never angry at Camille. What they did instead was begin to quietly pivot. They started talking about her future in different terms. Camille was creative. Camille was adaptable. Camille needed an opportunity that matched her energy. They used the word pivot a great deal. And somewhere in those conversations, my name started appearing next to Camille's in a way I had never authorized. My mother called me in the fall of my final year. She said she had been thinking about my work. She said she had been talking to my father, and they both felt that Camille had real business instincts, that she was a people person, that she could be an incredible face for a company. She said they thought it might be a beautiful thing if Lousia and Camille built something together. She said the word together as though it were a complete sentence. I asked what she meant by together. She said that my technical work and Camille's personality could complement each other. She said some of the best tech companies had a visionary and a public face. She said Camille could be that public face. I asked my mother what Camille's technical contribution would be. My mother said that not everything had to be technical. She said Camille could handle relationships, networking, presentation. I asked whether this was something Camille had expressed interest in herself. My mother said Camille was open to it. I noticed she had not said yes. I told my mother I would think about it. I did not think about it. I had already been thinking about my own plans for the patents for 2 years. Those plans did not include a business partnership with my sister. They included a licensing agreement I was negotiating with a company that worked in mobile infrastructure across Southeast Asia, and a separate conversation I was having with a nonprofit healthcare organization interested in the clinic management tool. These were real, active, ongoing professional conversations. I had a lawyer. I had an advisor. I had a plan. I did not tell my parents any of that. My mistake. The semester continued. My graduation was scheduled for May. I finished my coursework, completed my thesis, and managed the ongoing professional conversations with a focus and calm that surprised even me. The licensing negotiation moved slowly but steadily. The healthcare nonprofit expressed serious interest. My first patent had already generated a small licensing fee from a pilot agreement I had signed with a smaller company the previous year, enough to finish paying off my remaining personal loan with some left over. I was, for the first time in my adult life, standing on ground that did not feel like it could give way beneath me. My parents planned to attend the graduation. Camille was coming too. They were going to stay at a hotel near the university for 2 nights. My mother sent me a series of messages about dinner reservations and whether I had a good dress for the ceremony. She was warm. She was excited. I felt something I had not felt in a long time, something close to looking forward to it. That warmth was still in me when I woke up. On graduation morning, I got dressed carefully. The gown went on over a blue dress I had bought specifically for that day. I had not bought new clothing in almost a year, and buying that dress had felt like a small declaration. I am here. I did this. This day is real. I stood in front of the mirror in my apartment and I felt, for exactly about 4 minutes, purely happy. Then my mother knocked on my door. She came in alone. My father and Camille were waiting at the hotel. She sat down at my small kitchen table and placed a manila folder in front of her with the careful precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment. She was dressed beautifully. Her hair was done. She looked like she was already prepared for photographs. She explained the folder with a smile that was warm and practiced at the same time. She said that she and my father had given this a great deal of thought. She said they loved both of their daughters equally, which was the kind of sentence that always preceded something that proved the opposite. She said that Camille was at a crossroads. She said that the performing arts path had not worked out the way they had all hoped. She said Camille deserved a real future. She said my patents were something the whole family had a stake in, because the family had supported me through my education. She pushed the folder toward me. Inside was a legal transfer document, drafted by someone. I did not know who. It listed all 3 of my patents by name and number, and it transferred full ownership from my name to a joint ownership between myself and Camille, with a subsequent clause that gave Camille management authority over any licensing or commercial decisions. I read it twice. I read it slowly. I made sure I understood every word. Then I looked up at my mother. I asked her who drafted this document. She said my father had found someone to help with the paperwork. I asked her whether she understood what this document actually said. I told her it did not create a partnership. It handed Camille control. My mother said that was because Camille would be the one managing the business side. I asked my mother what business side. I said there was no business yet. There were patents and there were ongoing negotiations, both of which I was handling myself, with professional help I had arranged and paid for. My mother's smile changed slightly. She said I was being very technical about this. I said that patents were, by their nature, technical. I said that what she was holding was a document that would strip me of the ability to make decisions about my own intellectual property and hand that ability to my sister, who had no knowledge of the field, no involvement in the work, and no legal standing to receive it. My mother said I was being cold about family. I set the folder down. I set it down very gently because I did not want to give her the satisfaction of watching me react with anger. I stood up and I straightened my graduation gown, and I told her that I would not be signing that document, not that morning, not ever, and that we should get to the ceremony because I did not want to be late. She stared at me. I opened my apartment door. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because this story is not about being a robot. I was not calm inside. Inside, I felt something that is hard to describe cleanly. It was not pure anger. It was something older and heavier than anger. It was the recognition that had been building for years finally arriving in one clear, unavoidable moment. It was understanding that the thing I had suspected for a long time was not paranoia. It was the truth. My family had watched me build something, and their first organized response to that something was to reroute it toward Camille. That was who I was to them. I was the builder. Camille was the recipient. I walked to the graduation ceremony with my chin up and my hands steady. My father met us outside. He hugged me and said he was proud of me. He said it the way he had always said it, with warmth and genuine feeling, and that was the most complicated part of everything. He was not a cold man. He was not a calculating villain. He was a man who had arranged his love in a particular direction for so long that he no longer noticed he was doing it. He loved me. He just loved me in second place without realizing that was a position with consequences. Camille hugged me and said congratulations, and I looked at her, and I genuinely could not tell how much she knew about the folder. That uncertainty stayed with me through the ceremony. I walked across that stage and received my degree, and someone took a photograph, and in that photograph I am smiling. It is a real smile. It is the smile of someone who knows that the paper she is holding is not the most important thing she earned in the last 4 years, but who is choosing to feel the moment anyway. I earned that smile. Nobody was going to take it. At dinner that evening, my father raised tea. He subject. He did it in a public setting intentionally, I believe, because public settings make it harder to argue. We were at a restaurant he had chosen. There were other families nearby. The noise level was medium. He waited until we had ordered, and then he leaned forward and said, "So, your mother mentioned you had some concerns this morning." I said I had not had concerns. I had had a clear response. He said he understood I was cautious about business arrangements. That was natural. He said he and my mother had been thinking about this for a long time, and they genuinely believed a family partnership was the right move. He said Camille had been through a difficult few years, and she needed something to rebuild around. He said I had always been the strong one, and strong people had a responsibility to lift those who were struggling. That sentence landed on me like something physical. Strong people have a responsibility to lift those who were struggling. I turned it over in my mind. I had been lifting this family in quiet ways for years. I had never asked for acknowledgement of that, but I had never expected to be asked to lift more as a reward for having done it so consistently. I told my father that I respected his feelings, but that my patents were not a family resource. They were my intellectual property, registered in my name, the result of my education, my time, my labor, and my own financial investment. I said I was actively in negotiations that could affect the commercial future of those patents, and that bringing in an unplanned co-owner with management rights would potentially collapse those negotiations entirely. My father looked at me, then he looked at Camille. Camille was very quiet. She was looking at her plate. My father said I was being short-sighted. He said a family name behind a business created a different kind of credibility. He said Camille's connections in the arts and performance world gave her a network that could be valuable in ways I was not considering. I asked him to describe one specific way that a connection in regional performing arts would create value for a mobile data compression patent licensed to a Southeast Asian infrastructure company. The table went quiet. My mother said my name in a tone that meant I was being unkind. I said I was being precise, and that precision was important when someone was asking me to sign a legal document. My father put his fork down. He said, "Lousia, we did not raise you to put paperwork above family." I said I had not put paperwork above family. I had simply declined to sign paperwork that would remove my own rights from my own work in a way that served someone else's interests. Camille said my name, just my name. Quiet, I looked at her. And for a moment, I saw something in her face that I had not expected. She did not look entitled. She looked uncomfortable. She looked like someone who was sitting in the middle of a plan she had not entirely chosen. Dinner ended with the bill paid and goodbyes that were polite but thin. My parents went back to their hotel. Camille hugged me at the door of the restaurant and whispered that she was sorry. I told her I appreciated that. I meant it. I went home, took off my blue dress, hung it up, and sat down at my desk. I opened my email, and I sent one message to my attorney. The subject line was 3 words, timeline moving forward. In the body, I wrote that I wanted to accelerate the finalization of the existing licensing negotiation, and that I wanted everything formally documented and recorded before any external parties could introduce complications. I asked for a call the next morning. Then I sent a second email. This one went to the nonprofit healthcare organization that was interested in my clinic management patent. I had been moving slowly with them because I wanted to get the first deal closed before opening the second conversation fully. I told them I was ready to accelerate my timeline. I asked for a meeting the following week. Then I sat quietly for a while. I thought about the storage unit. Let me explain the storage unit, because this is the part my family did not know about and could not have guessed. About 8 months earlier, during a period when the licensing negotiation was generating early draft paperwork, and I was beginning to understand the real potential commercial value of what I had built. I had become very careful about my documentation. My attorney had advised me to maintain thorough physical and digital records of every step of the patent development process. Notes, drafts, correspondence, early prototypes, everything. The goal was to make any potential future dispute or challenge to ownership as airtight and unwinnable for the challenger as possible. I had taken that advice seriously, more seriously, perhaps, than even my attorney had intended. I had rented a small storage unit near the university. In it, I had placed a locked filing cabinet containing physical copies of everything. Eve. Rye draft, every email, every signed document from the patent office, every correspondence with my professor, the IP office, the attorneys, and the companies that had approached me. Every receipt for every expense related to the patent work. Every piece of evidence that these patents had been conceived, developed, documented, funded, and filed entirely by me, Lousia, alone. Additionally, I had created digital backups stored in 3 separate cloud accounts with different providers, each account protected by security protocols that I alone controlled. I had also drafted, on the advice of my attorney, a personal ownership statement that detailed the complete origin story of each patent, witnessed and notarized, that had been prepared 6 months earlier and sat in that filing cabinet. I had done all of this not because I had anticipated that specific morning with my mother and the folder, but because I had felt, in a quiet and persistent way, that something was coming. I did not know what form it would take. I only knew that I had built something valuable, that my family had shown me over many years how they thought about valuable things, and that preparation was wiser than regret. My mother's folder had not surprised me in the deepest sense. It had only clarified something I had already half seen. The call with my attorney the next morning was productive. She had already been aware of the general family dynamics because I had mentioned them in passing during earlier conversations, framed as context rather than complaint. She had noted it professionally and said nothing unnecessary. Now, she said the timeline I was proposing was achievable. The licensing company was ready to move. We could close the agreement within the next 3 to 4 weeks if I was committed to that pace. I said I was. She also said something that I did not ask for but that I needed to hear. She said that the transfer document my mother had presented was not legally enforceable without my signature. She said that no one could transfer my patents without my consent. She said that as long as I had not signed anything, and I confirmed I had not, my ownership was absolute and complete. She said the document was not a threat. It was a request dressed as paperwork. That distinction mattered. It moved something in me. The next several weeks were a period of intense professional activity that I will try to describe without losing you in the details. The licensing agreement moved through its final stages. There were 3 rounds of revision, 2 calls with the company's legal team, and one moment where I thought the timeline might slip by another month before everything steadied again. My attorney was thorough and specific. I was present for every conversation. During those same weeks, my parents called several times. My mother called twice and left voicemails that were warm on the surface, but carried an undercurrent of pressure. She said she hoped I had given more thought to what they had discussed. She said Camille was really trying to plan her next chapter, and my involvement would mean everything to her. She said family was the most important thing in the world, and she hoped I knew that. I listened to both voicemails and did not respond for 4 days. Then I sent a text that said I was in the middle of a significant professional deadline, and I would call when I had space to talk properly. It was true. It was also strategic. My father called once, and the call was more direct. He said he understood I had feelings about the way the conversation had gone. He said he respected my independence. He said, and I want to be very careful to represent this accurately because it is important, that the patents were filed during a period when the family had supported me financially. I asked him to be specific about the financial support. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said that they had helped with expenses during my time at university. I told him I appreciated any support they had given me. I also told him that the total contribution I had received from my parents during my 4 years at university was a one-time payment of $800 in my first semester and a care package of food items in my 3rd year. I told him that was not nothing, and I had been grateful for it. I also told him that the cost of filing 3 patent applications, including attorney fees subsidized by the university program, had been approximately $4,000 out of my own pocket, supplemented by a university grant I had applied for independently. I said that the financial record was clear and that I had documented it completely. My father said I had always been very good with numbers. I said thank you. He said he hoped I would reconsider. I said I would talk to him soon, and I ended the call. The licensing agreement closed 3 weeks after graduation. It was a 5-year licensing deal with a mobile infrastructure company, structured as an annual royalty payment against a minimum guaranteed amount. The exact numbers are not something I will share in full detail here, but I will tell you that the guaranteed minimum in the first year was more money than my parents had spent on both of their daughters' educations combined. The royalty potential in subsequent years was considerably higher. I sat in my attorney's office after the signing, and I felt the specific quiet that comes after something long and difficult finally becomes real. Not fireworks, just quiet, clean. My attorney handed me a copy of the signed agreement and shook my hand. She said I had done well. She said building this carefully had protected me. She said the documentation was so thorough that if anyone ever tried to challenge the ownership, they would find nothing to stand on. I thought about the storage unit. I thought about every late night and every difficult choice and every moment I had stayed at my desk instead of going somewhere easier. I drove home and I called Camille. I had not spoken to her since the night of the graduation dinner. I had been thinking about that whispered apology she had given me at the restaurant door. I had been thinking about the look on her face during dinner, uncomfortable and uncertain, not triumphant. She answered on the second ring. I told her I had signed a significant licensing agreement for my first 2 patents. I told her I was going to use part of the proceeds to establish a proper company structure so that I could manage the income and future negotiations professionally. I told her the 3rd patent was moving toward a deal with a healthcare nonprofit and that I was excited about the social impact it could create. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Lousia, I did not know about the document until the morning of your graduation. Mom told me about it in the car on the way to your apartment." I said I appreciated her telling me that. She said she had not wanted to be part of it. She said she had spent the last 3 weeks feeling terrible. She said she had told my parents clearly that she did not want anything from me that I had not chosen to give. I asked her what they had said. She said my father told her she was being emotional. He said she would understand the practical wisdom of it when she was older. She said she told him she was 20 years old and she understood clearly. I sat with that for a moment. Then I told Camille that I was not angry with her. I told her that what I had built was mine and I intended to keep it, but that had nothing to do with my feelings toward her as a person. I said I loved her. I said I was not going to let what our parents had done damage the relationship between the 2 of us. She cried. She said I was a better person than she deserved. I told her that was not the right way to think about it. I said she deserved to have a sister who was honest with her and who did not make her feel like a tool in someone else's plan. I said I hoped she would figure out what she actually wanted for her own life, separate from what our parents imagined for her. I said I believed in her ability to find her own path. We talked for almost an hour. It was the best conversation I had ever had with my sister, the longest and the most honest. We had spent years living in a house together without ever really seeing each other clearly because the family dynamic had put us in positions that made genuine connection hard. I had been the useful one. She had been the celebrated one. Neither of those roles had been fair to either of us. The conversation with my parents came 10 days after that licensing agreement was signed. My attorney had suggested I send a formal letter first, documenting my ownership and summarizing the completed agreement so that my parents had clear written information before any further conversation. I did that. My father called 2 hours after receiving the letter. He did not yell. My father was not a yeller. He was a pressurer. He spoke in the voice of a man who believed very deeply in his own reasonableness and therefore could not quite understand why anyone was not being as reasonable as he was. He said the letter was unexpected. He said he had not realized the agreement had moved so far so fast. He said he felt blindsided. I told him I had been managing these negotiations for several years. I told him the timeline had not been secret. I told him I had mentioned the patents and the ongoing interest from companies many times in our conversations. He said he had not understood the scale of it. I said I understood that. I said I wanted to be clear with him now. I said the patents were mine, the agreement was signed, and the legal structure of my company was being formalized. I said none of that was going to change. He said he was not asking for it to change entirely. He said he was asking me to consider what the family had invested in me. I told him I had addressed that in the letter. I listed the support I had received. I acknowledged it. I thanked him for it. I said it did not constitute a financial stake in my intellectual property. My father said, Lousia, I am not talking about financial stakes. I am talking about family loyalty. I said, I know, and that is exactly why I am being honest with you instead of just disappearing. You deserve honesty. I am giving you that. But honesty is not the same thing as what you are asking for. He was quiet for a while. Then he said he was disappointed. I said I was sorry to hear that. He said he expected more from me. I said I had spent a long time expecting things from this family too. I said we could talk about expectations if he wanted to. I said I was willing to have that conversation. He did not want to have that conversation. He said goodbye and ended the call. My mother called the next morning. Her call was different in tone. She was softer. She said she was not calling to argue. She said she just missed me and wanted to know how I was doing. She asked if we could talk the way we used to before all of this happened. I told her I was open to that. I told her I loved her. I told her I was not interested in having a permanently damaged relationship with my family, and I meant that. She said she was glad. She said she had been worried I was going to cut them off entirely. I said I had no intention of doing that. I said what I needed from my family was exactly what I had always needed. Respect for who I was and what I had built, without the assumption that it existed to be redistributed based on who needed it most at a given moment. My mother was quiet, then she said she understood. I am not sure she did entirely, but it was a beginning. The months that followed were a period of real change. The licensing income began arriving on schedule. I formalized my company, a small but properly structured entity with a name I had chosen carefully and a board of one, which was me, because I had earned the right to make these decisions alone until I chose otherwise. The clinic management patent moved through negotiation with the healthcare nonprofit, and a partnership agreement was reached that included both a licensing structure and a consulting arrangement where I would help them implement the system in 2 pilot clinics. That work was some of the most meaningful I had ever done. I moved to a better apartment. Not extravagant, just enough space and enough light to feel like I was living rather than surviving. I bought furniture that I chose myself and a desk that was better than any desk I had ever worked on. I planted something small and green on the windowsill because I wanted something alive in the room that I was responsible for keeping alive. Camille visited 3 months after the graduation. She stayed for a weekend. She had enrolled in a business administration program at a local college, something practical that interested her on its own terms, not something our parents had proposed for her. She was figuring out what she wanted. She looked lighter than I had seen her in years. We cooked dinner together and watched a movie and talked until late into the night. She asked me a lot of questions about how I had managed to stay focused during university despite everything. I told her the honest answer, which was that I had decided very early that I could not afford to wait for approval. I said that waiting for approval from people who were focused elsewhere was a form of giving them control over my timeline, and I had too much I wanted to build to allow that. She wrote that down in a small notebook she kept in her bag. I noticed, and it made me feel something warm. My father came around more slowly, which I had expected. He was a man who needed time to reframe things internally before he could acknowledge them externally. He did not have a dramatic moment of change. What happened instead was that over a period of about 4 months, the quality of his phone calls shifted. He started asking real questions instead of applying pressure. He asked how the licensing income was structured. He asked what the healthcare partnership looked like in practical terms. He asked whether I had considered hiring anyone to help with the workload. These were the questions of a father who was beginning to actually see what I had built, not just think of it as a resource. I answered his questions honestly and in detail. I did not make him earn each answer with an apology. That was not the relationship I wanted to have going forward. I wanted to move into something more honest, not keep score. But I also did not pretend the folder had not happened. The folder was real. What it had revealed was real. And though I was willing to move forward, I was not willing to move backward into the version of myself who would have quietly agreed with whatever her family asked because the alternative felt too hard. About 6 months after graduation, my mother asked me if I would consider contributing financially to help Camille through her knee. W program. She said Camille was managing, but that costs were higher than expected. I thought about it for exactly 24 hours. Then I called Camille directly. I did not go through my parents. I told Camille I wanted to offer her something, not because our parents had asked me to, but because I believed in what she was building for herself. I said I would cover 1 semester of her tuition, not as a loan, as a gift from a sister who had more than she needed for the moment and wanted to use it to support someone she loved. Camille cried again. She said she was going to pay me back. I told her the only payment I wanted was to watch her build, something she was genuinely proud of. I called my mother afterward and told her what I had done and how I had done it. I said I had given it directly to Camille because Camille and I had our own relationship now, and I wanted to keep it that way. I said I was happy to support my family in ways I chose, but I was not going to set up a system where my parents directed my resources toward whichever need they identified first. My mother said she understood. I think this time she actually did. The year following graduation was not without hard moments. There were weeks when the business felt overwhelming, and I did not have enough hours in the day. There were nights when the distance from my family felt like a weight rather than a boundary. There were moments when I missed the version of my childhood that I had always wanted to have, the one where I was both useful and celebrated, where my accomplishments generated dinner parties, where my parents' warmth was distributed by something closer to fairness. I grieved that childhood briefly and honestly, and then I set it down. It was not the childhood I had. And the life I was building from the one I actually had was real and mine, and already more than I had imagined possible at 22. The third patent generated its first real commercial interest from a private health technology company in addition to the nonprofit partnership. That conversation was in early stages when the year ended, but my attorney described it as serious. The portfolio was growing. The company was growing. My name was on things that mattered. I did not need my family to celebrate that. I had learned to feel the click of a solved problem as its own celebration. But I will tell you one more thing, because I want this story to end with the fullness of what actually happened and not just the professional victory. About 9 months after graduation, my father called me on a Sunday afternoon. He did not have an agenda that I could detect. He asked about the business and I told him. He asked about my apartment and I described it. He was quiet for a moment and then he said, "I want to say something to you." I said, "Okay." He said, "I looked at what you did, really looked at it, not as your father who wanted things for your sister, but as someone trying to honestly see what you built." He said it was remarkable. He said he was sorry it had taken him this long to say so without anything attached to it. He said he was proud of me, just proud. Not proud and hopeful that pride could be converted into something else. I did not cry on that call, but I sat very still for a long time after. I did not need that sentence to be whole. I had made myself whole. But I had not stopped wanting it. Somewhere deep and quiet, and hearing it in that form, clean and unattached, was its own kind of completion. My name is Lousia. I built 3 patents in 4 years on borrowed time and insufficient sleep, and the stubbornness of someone who had decided that waiting for permission was too expensive. My family tried to reroute what I built. They did not succeed. Not because I was cold, and not because I was cruel, but because I had been careful. I had documented everything. I had protected what was mine before anyone thought to take it. And when the moment came, I did not need to yell. I needed to stand still and say no, and that was enough. The folder is still in my memory. My mother's practiced smile, my blue dress, the weight of that document in my hands. I think about it sometimes not with bitterness, but with clarity. It was the moment that made everything else undeniable, and undeniable was exactly what I needed. Before you go today, I want you to sit with one question that Lousia's story leaves behind. How many times have you built something real, something that cost you sleep and sacrifice and quiet years of effort, only to have the people closest to you treat it as a shared resource the moment it became valuable? If you have ever been the dependable one, the useful one, the one who was noted instead of celebrated, this question belongs to you too. Leave a comment below and tell me honestly, would you have signed that folder? And if you would not have, what made you strong enough to know the difference? Lousia's story is here every week for everyone who is still figuring that out.